But we begin this season now with this book, Wrestling with Doubt, Finding Faith. The premise of this book is that doubt, it is not the enemy of faith, but doubt can help you mature in faith. And we're going to consider difficult questions each week. Today, we're going to consider, is there a God? It's a big question. We want to wrap our hands, our arms around it and see what God says in regards to this big question, is there a God? After worship today, Ann Levens is going to lead a small group for those of you that wants to stay and continue a small group conversation here in the fellowship hall. So if you want to stay and talk about what you heard or what questions you might have, feel free to stay soon after worship for a few minutes, and then you guys can have that conversation there. The idea is to dive deep into discipleship. I can tell you, if it moves, there we go. As we wrestle with doubts, we all wrestle with some kind of doubts. And what I will not do during this sermon series is try to persuade you. I can try, and maybe I will be successful, but that is not the role of the sermon series. What I wish for you to do is to begin to answer the questions for yourself or to have better questions out of you. Why? Because I understand that you can lead a horse to the water, but you cannot force it to drink. These answers are only answered through and because of revelation, not because of how smart you are or talented or how good I am at preaching. No, these questions that we're going to consider have to do with revelation. So I will guide for you to begin to answer or to have better questions. Now, the book is put together because of something that the author, Adam Hamilton, did back in his church. They questioned about 1,000 people within his church, and they found that 47% of the people, of these 1,000 people, say that doubts help mature their faith. 27 of them said that doubts didn't matter to them. They still believe, like the Trinity. They had doubts about the Trinity, but it didn't stop them. 23% said that doubts were hindering a little bit on their faith, but it was not a big deal. And only 3% said that doubts prohibit their faith. When you look at these numbers, you want to know, what did they answer? Hi, Jed. And so I want us to consider this because I know that there are legitimate questions in regards to the scriptures and how God relates to us. All right. Is there a God? Theologically speaking, I can tell you this. Theologically speaking. Is there a God? Well, ideas of finitude and temporality often get associated with the concept of existence. I know it sounds like a bunch of mumbo jumbo, but this is actually taken from one of my textbooks from seminary. Theologians have sometimes found cause to worry about what we're doing when we assert, when we try to convince each other of the existence of God. Why? Because of what people like Paul Tillich, which is one of the most influential theologians of the 20th century, said. Paul Tillich, a theologian, a guy far smarter than I am, said, God doesn't exist. God doesn't exist the way that this chair exists. How can you aim to understand the complexity and the grandeur of God with 3 pounds of mass, gray mass of your brain? How can you wrap your mind around a concept of divinity? You and I are not that smart. And so Paul Tillich says God doesn't exist. God is being. It's beyond essence and existence. Therefore, to argue that God exists is to deny God. However, I can tell you that to answer the question, is there a God? There are three ways that you can prove that God exists. There are three arguments that civilization can use to prove that God exists. There is a cosmological argument, the cause and effect. That means that someone had to do something for the Big Bang to happen. Somebody had to flip the switch for the big explosion that led to creation. That is one of the biggest arguments. You can Google it. It's an extensive argument, but it's a valid argument. You can prove that God exists because not even science can refute that something can come out of nothing. Science tells you that something will always come out of something. The only explanation at this point in 2024 that science has is that something happened and they are yet not able to explain it. So we can argue the cosmological argument about the existence of God. We can also argue the teleological argument, not theological, teleological argument, which tells you that there is a designer. Someone designed this outfit that I'm wearing today. Someone said, Mario will look good on that color, don't you think? That's my wife. Yes, she picked a right color. It fits, especially these tones. There was a designer. My haircut, someone designed that haircut. Somebody cut it. My glasses, somebody designed that. So there is a teleological argument that there is a designer of the world, of this reality, of why when there is a sunset or a sunrise, the colors change, or why the green leaves happen that way, that on the other. Then there is a moral argument that tells you that morality comes from some place. Someone had to decide what it was good and what is bad long time ago, and that we just followed that. Somebody had to decide that killing was bad. It's not our idea. It comes from some place. So there is a moral argument that you can follow to prove of the existence of God. But as I pay attention to your face, this means not a lot. If anything goes like this, whoof. Why? Because can you imagine using that word, the teleological argument, in a sentence? It's hard. It doesn't match. So instead of trying to prove the existence of God, I want to share with you a testimony of an author of the existence of God. This is where I want to read Psalm 19 to you, beginning of verse 1 to 6. The heavens proclaim the glory of God. The skies display his craftsmanship. Day after day, they continue to speak. Night after night, they make him known. They speak without a sound or word. Their voice is never heard. Yet their message has gone through the earth, and their words to all the world. God has made a home in the heavens for the sun. It bursts forth like a radiant bridegroom after his wedding. It rejoices like a great athlete eager to run the race. The sun rises at one end of the heavens and follows its course to the other end. Nothing can hide from its heat. My friends, this is a word inspired by God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. What Psalm 19 does is that it doesn't give you an evidence of the reality of God, right? It gives you a testimony of an author that was inspired by God to tell us the beauty of what that author saw at that moment. The Bible is filled with testimonies. If you take the book and you go to page 5, you will see how God has given testimony about his presence. But you cannot use those testimonies as irrefutable proof. Testimonies are meant to be shared. Testimonies are meant to lift the spirits of each of us, but not to prove of God's existence. There are 3 questions that we ought to consider. Is there a God? How do you know? What proof do you have? What difference does it make? The goal is not to make you doubt the existence of God. The job is for you to consider, what would you say if someone asks you, is there a God? If someone were to say, hey, is there a God? What would you say? Yes, no, but what would you say after that comma? What follows to what you're saying? What is it that you believe? Is there a God? Yes. So simple to say, but what would you say afterwards? And are these questions creating panic because you don't know, because you have never considered? That is why doubt enters and plays a good role, because doubt is not the enemy of faith. Doubt is the thing that leads you to mature your faith, to grow into a fine structure that gives you life. I hope that you don't panic with those questions, because this is why we have chosen this theme. I want you to see doubt as a Robin to the Batman of faith, if that makes any sense. Robin, the sidekick of Batman. Batman is faith. Robin can be doubt. Always assistant. There are 3 things that doubt can do in faith. Doubt can encourage critical thinking and discernment. Because who wants to be in a cult, right? Do you want to be in a cult? I don't. I like to have my own mind. So doubt can act as a safeguard against blind trust. If not, what would you think that Christ, after coming down from the cross, after the resurrection, with Thomas, says, touch. Doubt keeps you vigilant and aware of red flags. As a minister of the Word and Sacrament within the Presbyterian Church, do you think that I have control over everything? I'm nothing but a servant. I don't manage the money. I don't know the accounts. Can you imagine a pastor that will control all of the things, including the money? Do you know the temptation that leads to? That's right. Doubts keep you vigilant and aware of red flags, of behavior. This is why every week, every year, as a congregation, you go to the congregational meeting and I leave the room and the congregation has a discussion whether you wish to have me as your pastor or not. Because at some point you have to say, do we have doubts? Well, we have this and this and this. Okay, are those enough? No. Are those troubles? No. Oh, okay. This is a process that we all do. Doubts can lead to good things if only doubts fuels your journey to a mature faith. If you just dwell in doubts and you just stay with those doubts, doubts can be your worst enemy. But if you use doubts to further your growth as a disciple of Christ, it can be a great thing. I want you to pay attention to Psalm 19 again, especially verse 5. It bursts forth like a radiant bridegroom after his wedding. You know, yesterday, Yesterday around 2, we had a memorial service for Peter Rogers. And Peter Rogers had been married for 68 years. The day before he died, actually not even a day, about 12 hours before he died, I went to his house, and he was in that moment of gasping for air. If you have ever seen it, you have to be sure of your faith to see someone gasping for air like that. And Sherry, his wife, she was next to him. And I want you to imagine themselves in a large bed, and he is in a white t-shirt, unable to move really. And she has her tiny hand, because he was a large man, just touching him, the forehead, and moving her hand up and down his chest. That's love, right? And so I have this memory engraved in my mind, and we're doing the funeral yesterday, the memorial service. And when I get home, Mel says, hey, for your birthday, I want us to have a date because the grandparents are here, so we don't have to pay for childcare. Right? And so we went on a date, and she wanted to take me out to this place that she likes a lot. And after we were in Tavares, we walked down the park, and we were holding hands. I cannot remember the last time we would hold hands like that. Normally, we were like, come here, come here, come here. And we're just holding hands, and she took me to this place, and we got to this bench, and I'm going to keep it PG, but we kiss. Aww, right? It was the best. She gave me a hug, and she says, I love you, and I said, I adore you. And this is what it tells you. Is this evidence that God exists? No, it is not, but it's my testimony that I love my wife, just like Sherry and Peter love each other. My friends, as I turn 40 and I'm eager to preach and to see, I want you to know that each of you have a testimony that gives the glory of God, but it cannot prove the existence of God. The psalmist isn't giving you an ultimate, irrefutable evidence that God exists. The psalmist in Psalm 19 is telling you of how the psalmist perceived God, and is sharing that for you to celebrate what the psalmist saw, and for you to think, how would you write your own psalm to give the glory to God? Would you be like Solomon, writing about the love that he feels? Would you be like David? Would you be like the psalmist on 19? Or would you be like David on Psalm 51 that says, never take away your spirit away from me? The Psalm 19 is not evidence that God exists, but is the testimony of someone that perceived God as real. Just like the story of Genesis, the author in Genesis is not telling you the how of creation. He's telling you the why of creation. In Genesis 1 and 2, and how things move in one way or the other, and even the contradictions between the story of Genesis 1 and the story of Genesis 2 and how they contradict each other, they are further evidence of a testimony as to why you and I are alive. Why you and I can count with God. It has nothing to do with evidence of his existence. The problem is that many Christians use Genesis 1 and 2 to prove that God exists when God doesn't need your help to make him real. Did you know that one of the names of Jesus is the Lion of Judah? All right, that's one of my favorite things. I see God in strength. So when I see the Lion of Judah, I see Christ. Now, the Lion of Judah is always with you. And if the Lion of Judah is always with you, that means that you have a lion next to you. And if someone is attacking the lion, do you need to defend the lion? No, you just need to let the lion go. Let the lion do his thing. You don't need to defend God, my friends. If someone says, is there a God? You can say, I have seen God. You see how it works? Is there a God? Does God exist? The answer is yours to make. A decision to believe that the magnificence, its vastness, and beauty of creation and all that includes is nothing but an accident, or is a result of the one who said, "Let there be light." Do I choose to believe in a universe that is self-created, whose laws are self-created, where life is ordered out of nothing? Or do I choose to believe in a universe that is an expression of the power, beauty, and the will of God, whose origins I cannot explain, but I embrace? Yesterday, I was in love. If you ask a person of science to explain what love is, this is what they will tell you. You're not in love, you're just stimulated by 3 chemicals in your brain. Noradrenaline, that stimulates the adrenaline production, causing a racing heart and sweaty palms. Dopamine, that feels good chemical. And phenylethylamine, that is just released when we are near another person that matters to us, giving us a comfortable bellyache. Or you can say you have butterflies and you fell in love. Which one do you want? Do you believe in love at first sight? I do. You know why? Because I fell in love at first sight with Mel. Perhaps you have not experienced love at first sight. I have. That doesn't mean that love at first sight is real for you. And that's fine. You can not have love at first sight, still be love. You can be married 3 times and still fall in love. We're nothing but human. But science tells you that it's just 3 chemicals. But if you have ever been in love, you know that it's not just 3 chemicals. There's magic, butterflies in the air. It's not just a comfortable bellyache. My friends, I know that when the question comes into, is there a God? We want certainty. As humans, we want to be certain. However, God doesn't give us certainty. God gives us mystery, wonder, and awe. When you want certainty, God gives you the stars. When you want answers, God gives you planets. When you want darkness, God gives you the sun. I'm not aiming to persuade you. I'm just saying that to answer the question, is there a God? You can only present your testimony, but you are not responsible to prove that God is real. It is not your responsibility. What is your responsibility? To love one another, to care for one another, to encourage one another. But your job as a Christian, as a disciple, as a follower of Christ, it is not to prove that God is real. It is not within your job description. Your job description is to love, to encourage, and to carry each other. My friends, what a joy. That is not our responsibility to prove that God is real. And so, the task today is for you to consider the words of the Apostle Paul in Acts 17. Have you explored how you live, move, and have your being in and outside of God? With God, there is purpose. Outside of it, there is nothing. And then, with boldness, the job is for you to answer and to give a testimony the way that the psalmist did. What would you say? How have you experienced God today, and how would you share for the glory of God, not to prove that He's real, but for His praise? Amen.